So a huge question as you're going into retirement or thinking about it is, should you pay off your long-term and short-term debt before you retire? This is a really complex question, and I'm going to go over the pluses and minuses coming up next. Hi everybody, my name is Dee Burks and this is Retirement Rescue, and I get a lot of questions about debt. Debt is huge for everybody, whether you're retired or not. But as people start looking at retirement, thinking about retirement, and start to retire, and they've been retired a year or two, the question of paying off debt with some of their retirement money comes up. Now I'm going to be doing a deep dive into the two different types of debt. I'm going to treat them separately. We're going to talk about things like a mortgage. That's usually the biggest debt most people have, and the biggest payment that goes out every month. Not always, but a lot of times it is. So we're going to talk about your mortgage. If you have a few years left on a car payment, we're going to talk about that. And then separately, we're going to talk about credit cards. Credit cards are a huge concern for everybody, but they need to be treated separately. And you'll understand why when we get there. Now, before we do our deep dive, I really want to stress this video is not for everybody. Not everybody has the assets to pay things off. Not everybody is in that situation when they retire. So I'm going to be talking to those people who do have the option to pay a few things off, or they have the option to work a year or two extra and pay things off. If you're already retired and you can't work anymore and you have debt, that's a different story. A lot of the things I'm also going to be talking about are my opinion. I'm going to be telling you what I would do if I were in these situations, not what you should do. Your situation is different, so be sure and consult your financial advisor and your tax attorney. They are both important. Tax accountant if you don't have a tax attorney. For a lot of people, as they approach retirement, they have a lot of their mortgage paid off, but they still have a balance. So that question comes up, should they use some of their retirement money, some money out of their 401k or IRA, to pay off that mortgage? This is how I look at it. If you have a pile of money in a 401k, a 403b, some sort of account, either from a former employer or maybe one you had if you were self-employed, like an IRA, and that account has enough money in it that you can take maybe 25% of that account and pay the debt off, then I would say, yes, you should do it. But let me talk you through the numbers on that one. Let's just say you're in a situation where a few years back you refied your house because you only had, let's say, $100,000 left to pay. So you took advantage of those great interest rates we've all enjoyed the past few years, and you refinanced it, and your payment is now $1,200 a month, let's say. But now you're thinking about retiring, and you're in a situation where you're not really old enough to take your full Social Security. You're 60 years old, but you can go ahead and retire from your company and have retirement coming in. And if you've worked for that company 20, 25 years, depending on your salary and what you were making, but let's say you were making between $60,000 and $80,000. You were a nurse, you were an administrator, maybe you were a truck driver. Truck drivers make great money. But let's just say that you made pretty decent money, and so you have maybe $400,000 in that account right now. You can take 25% of it, pay off that $100,000 mortgage, and not have $1,200 a month going out. It makes it way easier to live on that retirement money and or Social Security should you be old enough for it. But here's what I often encounter when I tell people something like that. People have very ingrained mindsets, and often this has come from years of speaking to financial advisors, listening to financial news, talking to accountants, and I'm not dinging those people. They're giving you good advice while you're working. You put your money in your 401k and you put it away. You don't want to take money out of that, says your accountant, because you'll pay taxes on it. They're all correct. You'll pay penalties on it too. But now you're retired. Now you're beyond that penalty phase. Now you're to the point you want to have a nice retirement. But many people still are in that mindset of, I can't take money out of my 401k to pay off debt. I can't do that. That's long-term investment. And it is, but that investment is to make your retirement better. And here's what you have to think about. Understand, financial advisors don't get paid if you take your money out of your financial accounts. And they have for years, and they still do, tell people, leave your money in there. But that should change when you get ready to retire. Your financial advisor should be helping you be sure you can get your bills paid and live a decent retirement. They shouldn't be telling you, just leave that money alone and don't use it while you're struggling financially to pay your bills in retirement. That's crazy. So you really want to have those conversations, but you also have to think about your own mindset. I just had this conversation with someone. This particular person has $400,000 in their retirement account, in their 401k. And he's really worried about living on his retirement because it's less than he's making now. That's something we all have to adjust to. And when I suggested, hey, you should take out some of this money from your 401k and pay that mortgage off, it was like sacrilege. I had suggested something horrific. Yet, over the past few months, as the market has gone down, his investment account has dropped down to $280,000 just because the market dropped. He gets no benefit from that drop. Had he taken out the $100,000, he'd have no mortgage. He'd still have more money in his account. But even today, this person says, oh, but that's okay. It's a long-term investment. It'll make it back. Guess what? If you'd taken out the $100,000, paid down your mortgage, it would have made that 25% back too. And you would not have a mortgage. So you really have to think about, okay, how are you thinking about this? Are you really being reasonable now that you're in retirement or approaching retirement? That mindset that you've had for 30 years of you've got to leave that money in there and leave it alone, you are now getting to the point where it's time to use that money. Now let's talk about another thing, and that's taxes. People have a really bizarre sense of, oh, I can't take that money out. I'll pay tax on it. Guess what? You're going to pay tax on that money no matter what. So it's not a situation of you're not going to pay tax on that money. You are. It's deciding when to take that money out and when to pay those taxes before you are forced to take that money out. Everybody that has a 401k or some sort of tax sheltered account, employer account, if you let that money sit in there until you're in your 70s, guess what? You start having required minimum distribution. The IRS requires and will force you to start taking a percentage of that money out. So you start using up that money and paying taxes. That's why they have required minimum distribution, because they want you to pay those taxes, and you're going to pay those taxes no matter what. But you can choose when to pay them. This is why I said not only talk to your financial advisor, talk to your accountant. Decide, okay, if I'm going to take the money out of this account and pay my mortgage off, maybe I'm going to wait until I'm completely retired so my income is lower, I am in a lower tax bracket, and then maybe I decide to take a little hunk of it, maybe $30,000 out in December. And then maybe I decide in January to take another little hunk out of it, maybe $30,000 in January. And then I wait until the next January to take the rest of that $100,000 out. I've spread it over 3 tax years. So that tax bite is not near as big. And you can take enough out to cover the taxes. It's not that big a deal. You are going to pay those taxes no matter what. This idea that you have to leave it in there because you might have to pay taxes on it, it's kind of ridiculous. They're going to force you to pay those taxes at some point. So you might as well choose what is going to be the best for you. When is going to be the best for you. Now let's also talk about your car. And I'm not talking about people who lease their vehicles because they never own their vehicle. I'm talking about people who have a loan on their car. Should you pay that off? If you have a couple of years left on your car, and here again, you have money sitting in an account for retirement, and you can take less than 25% of it and pay that car off, I would actually do it immediately. You're going to not be paying that interest. The car will be paid for. Here again, your retirement dollars are going to go farther because you're not having that big monthly payment go out every month. But your mortgage and your car are such big expenses for a lot of people that don't have a $400,000 retirement account. They really can't touch those. But they can possibly pay off their credit cards. Now let's talk about this kind of debt. Here is the problem with credit cards. So many of us, when we're working, we've got money coming in, we use our cards for a lot. Little incidental purchases, maybe you have one that you use for gas, you have one, you use them for specific things. And that has been an ingrained habit for a long time. You don't think anything about it. But maybe you're the kind of person that carries a balance. Now, if you're the kind of person that pays it off every month, that is great. But if you're the kind of person that carries a balance, we need to talk about the behaviors that are allowing you to accumulate that short-term debt. It's supposed to be short-term, but for many people, it's a long-term thing. They just let it revolve. However, when you get to retirement and your income is more or less fixed, or it's in a much smaller range, you don't have as much variance, it can be very difficult to pay that down. Number one, because you haven't addressed your behavior, so you're continuing to put things on that card. And number two, because you don't have as much income variance, so you don't have as much room to maybe put a hunk of that money toward those credit cards. If you are going into retirement or thinking about retirement and you have credit card debt, I would tell you to get that paid off. If you can get it paid off before you retire and you don't have to use retirement funds, hey, that is optimal. And then stop charging on them. Because if you continue to accumulate, all you're doing basically is bailing yourself out to get yourself right back into debt. That's not good. But if you're already retired and maybe you work part-time or you work seasonally, take a season or two and put all of that money toward that debt. Get it paid off. But let's say you're retired and you have some 401k money. Maybe you've got $40,000 in an old employer account, 401k. And maybe that's all you have. And you're not planning to use that money anytime soon. It's just sitting there doing its thing. If your credit card debt is less than $10,000, 25% of that account, then by all means pay it off. But address the behaviors. If you take that $10,000 out and you pay off that credit card and you haven't addressed the behaviors, guess what? Year or two down the road, you've got another $10,000 on those credit cards and you still haven't made back that money that you used to bail yourself out the first time. And a lot of people do this. They end up bailing themselves out until they run out of retirement money. That is not what you want to do. The whole idea of paying down debt is to make your life easier long term in retirement. It's not to continue to gain that debt. And I do want to say this. There are many, many people who are in retirement right now. Maybe they're in their 70s, maybe even 80s. They're using their credit cards to get by. That can happen so easily. When you run out of 401k money, let's say, and you're still living on a fixed income that isn't keeping up with inflation, a lot of people get in the situation where they feel like their only choice is to use that debt. And there are older Americans with a tremendous amount of debt. They're barely keeping their heads above water, if at all, and those choices are just not easy. So I tell everybody, no matter your age, if you are able to, either pre-retirement or in retirement, get rid of debt, do it as fast as you can in the most thoughtful way possible without harming yourself long term, and your retirement will be much easier, much more peaceful, and you will be able to go and do those things that you love without feeling like you can't afford it. Now, if you've enjoyed this video, please click subscribe, and I'll see you next time.